There are those actors and actresses who are definitely around but almost never come up in conversations about the biggest stars, the most talented, or the most attractive. Some of the Hollywood elite seem welded into the top 5, while others might scrape into the 99th or 100th spot once or twice, pretty much only because the list makers have run out of options and still have a couple of blank spots left. And that's when these underdogs get their day in the sun. These are the actors who never got a superstar label and never came close to dominating even the secondary tier, the really big names. They earn their living in the basement of that category. People might not remember their names, but everyone knows their faces. Sometimes you almost feel bad for them. But the truth is, thousands of aspiring actors would sell their souls to a major producer just to be in that basement spot. There's even wild gossip some sold more than their souls, though that's probably more urban legend than reality. But some people make it there without selling anything at all. Or at least that's what we hope. It's good to believe in a brighter future sometimes. If you don't, making it through life gets way harder. James McAvoy is one of those actors. Over his long career, he's tried to play just about everyone, James Bond, Batman, you name it. But he's been turned down for all sorts of reasons. Too short, not convincing enough as an actor, or simply because someone else was better for the part. Happens all the time. At least according to the mean-spirited folks in the industry. And if some producer finally came around and decided McAvoy was the one, then he turned down the role himself just to maintain his image. And that's important too. Seriously though, for what other actor was the big breakthrough a role like Mr. Tumnus? Hard to say. I'm sure some other talented folks got bumped up the ladder by a suspiciously odd role. But hey, someone will remember them. Maybe. Who else has landed a career-defining part while clearly buzzed at an important industry event? Probably more people than you'd think, though no one ever admits it. Instead, they spin some story about overcoming adversity through sheer force of will, with a dash of cosmic fate thrown in. McAvoy just tells it straight. He could barely stand, landed a crucial role, and was able to buy himself a bigger second house thanks to it. Admittedly, the stars may have aligned for him in that case too. In short, our guy today is James McAvoy, a quirky fellow who rarely makes the A-list and is even less likely to appear on lists of the most important. But James McAvoy is out there, and sometimes just having him around turns out to be a great asset to a film. James McAvoy is Scottish, which, as he's admitted, was something he tried to downplay early in his acting days. Producers and directors weren't keen on working with Scots due to the accent. Even though he learned to hide it, once they heard he was from Scotland, they didn't want to risk it. So he'd just list himself as English. He grew up in a financially strapped family in Glasgow and originally wanted to be a priest. Apparently, his childhood dream was to travel the world as a missionary. But theater caught his eye, and despite not having the money for proper drama school, he hustled for 3 years, working every menial gig from loading docks to fetching coffee to save up. Convinced he'd failed his entrance exams, he actually signed up for the Royal Navy, planning to see the world that way. But as fate would have it, he was accepted to drama school after all. The Royal Navy set sail without him. His earliest parts came in the late 90s, mostly playing the cinematic equivalent of guy number 3 in the back row. Sometimes you could even spot him in series like Band of Brothers, 2001, if you squinted. Breaking through to the front of the cast happened in the early 2000s, but initially only in movies absolutely nobody watched. If anyone did watch them, they sure didn't tell anyone about it. 2003 was McAvoy's breakout year, with roles in Children of Dune and the original British Shameless, shows that won a slew of awards and finally gave his career real momentum. In 2004, he starred in Inside I'm Dancing, which American and European audiences found so forgettable that nobody noticed it existed. Critics praised McAvoy, but the film didn't break out past the local festival circuit. Hence its measly 16,000 IMDb votes. Sometimes that's just how it goes. The movie barely scraped together enough box office to pay for gas money home. Then there was Wimbledon. He had a supporting role, a strange, troubled film. Nobody wanted to act in it. Even fewer wanted to learn tennis for it. Years later, the director grumbled that he never realized how hard it would be just to make the actors look the part on camera. Forget about actually playing tennis. Eventually, they gave up and started animating the tennis balls because nobody could get a decent serve. Kirsten Dunst said she was forced into the film because of contract obligations and didn't want to be there at all. Before she was cast, they even tried to drag Reese Witherspoon into the project, but she somehow slipped away. Connected? Who knows? McAvoy was cast at the very last moment. Everyone else had bailed, and he wasn't in a position to say no to any role. With a budget of $31 million, the movie barely scraped $40 million at the box office. It could have put a dent in his career, but before the film even came out, McAvoy had already landed the part of a faun. On the Narnia set, the older actors swore so much that production installed a swear jar. Anytime someone cursed, they had to chip in some spare change. Apparently, McAvoy ended up the most out of pocket since he just couldn't stop cursing, and at the time wasn't earning that much. Eventually, he reportedly had to clean up his act. If not for his wallet, then at least for the kids on set. When The Chronicles of Narnia finally hit theaters, it exploded, grossing $746 million on a $180 million budget. Thanks to these projects, McAvoy turned in just a couple of years from a nobody hovering somewhere on the fringes into an actor everyone suddenly wanted to hire. He's even said that acting offers got so overwhelming, he had to give up gaming, a passion he devoted all his free time to up until the mid-2000s. The problem was, whenever he got home, he'd immediately jump into his Xbox, while the scripts gathering dust next to it would get a quick once-over at breakfast before he dashed out to auditions and rehearsals, where he'd get his lines wrong and forget cues. People started giving him strange looks, and one day his Xbox went flying out the window. It was The Chronicles of Narnia that really let McAvoy be Scottish on screen. His heritage from that movie helped him land a leading role in The Last King of Scotland. Not as the titular king, that was Forrest Whitaker's part, but as the king's Scottish buddy. For the record, Idi Amin never actually had a Scottish friend, but the filmmakers figured if you're going to claim the title King of Scotland, you ought to have a Scottish pal in your entourage. So McAvoy got the job. It's a movie about the Ugandan dictator infamous for mass atrocities resulting in hundreds of thousands of deaths. After that movie, McAvoy's stock shot up even higher. He racked up most of his awards nominations for that role. Though he never won, people at least told him he did a great job. The box office also delivered. $49 million earned on a $6 million budget. The movie looks more expensive than it was because the Ugandan government showered the filmmakers with equipment, soldiers, and permits, saving them more than half the expected costs. Later on, the Ugandan authorities did complain the movie wasn't true to life, but by then the crew was long gone. Meanwhile, smaller projects like Penelope and Starter for 10 tanked. But with all his other successes, nobody really noticed. Then someone decided McAvoy just looked like an old-school aristocrat, and he got flooded with offers for period dramas. He signed on to becoming Jane immediately. Fun fact, the now famous story of his Xbox being thrown out the window happened while working on this movie. McAvoy said that the film was so interesting, and the script even better, that resisting his Xbox was twice as tough. Eventually, he had no choice but to kill the Xbox. It was the better machine. Maybe that's why it had to go. The Oblivion disc, the worst offender of all his games, even got burned in the fireplace. So McAvoy didn't look too much like a hobbit running around after Anne Hathaway, and the wardrobe team issued him platform shoes. He wore them circling Hathaway all through the shoot, since he's actually 4 centimeters shorter than her. Becoming Jane didn't make much noise at the box office. $39 million on a $16 million budget. With TV rights and DVD sales, the filmmakers probably broke even. People blamed the lackluster performance on the true story approach. There's a whole fog of war around Jane Austen's biography, but the filmmakers ignored historical conventions and went all in on fantasy, prompting audiences and critics alike to pound them for it. McAvoy got his usual dose of praise, though. His next big film was Atonement, another period piece. It's the film where McAvoy bagged the second half of his rare awards nods. After all, He was mostly scraping by when it came to accolades. Unlike becoming Jane, he genuinely loved the Atonement script and chased the part so hard, he literally camped outside director Joe Wright's home, telling him he'd never find a better actor. Wright eventually got tired of the stalking and gave him the part. Of course, the original script didn't survive intact. The story got changed during filming and overhauled even more after test audiences didn't like the non-linear storytelling. The film's release got pushed back several months so editors could rework it, smoothing things out and adding scenes to clarify points that confused viewers earlier. Atonement finally hit theaters at the end of 2007 and made $134 million on a $30 million budget. Despite the fact that most of the awards whizzed right by McAvoy, the film was a gigantic success. It even started the trend of long, uncut oneers, those extended scenes with no edits, which became a big deal in cinema after this. And for a moment, it looked like James McAvoy was going to be made into a major star. At first, McAvoy was rejected at the auditions for Wanted. Producers told him they needed a tough guy, not a boring little runt. Yes, that's how they described James. But after burning through every other actor who looked right for the role, they decided to take a risk on a less conventional action hero. In the comics, superheroes strut around in colorful spandex. But the filmmakers ditched that idea completely. That's when someone remembered that slightly shady, foul-mouthed Scottish guy who'd swung by, James McAvoy. They reached out, and as luck would have it, he was available. Since James insisted on doing as many stunts as possible himself, the crew put him through boot camp with assorted trainers and spent a few months running him ragged in stadiums and gyms. Freshly trained and raring to go, James arrived on set and promptly injured himself in several different ways. He twisted his ankle during a stunt, and before that had healed, he hurt his knee badly enough to shut down production while he was carted off to the doctors. It wasn't a career-ending injury, but after that, the only stunts James was legally allowed to perform involved walking down the street or sitting in a chair. Thankfully, he managed those without incident. Wanted, Timur Bekmambetov's film, hit theaters in 2008 and absolutely cleaned up at the box office. With a $75 million budget, it raked in $342 million. You'd think a sequel would follow instantly. They even wrote several scripts for one over the years. But it never happened. And the reason is Angelina Jolie. James was ready to return, but Jolie had zero interest. And all the market research said she was the film's main draw. Sure, a twist could have worked for the comic book crowd, but the studio was too scared to greenlight a sequel without her. So McAvoy had to move on, sequel-less, from one of his biggest hits. After Wanted, his career hit a bit of a slowdown, and he started piling up roles in movies nobody really wanted. There was The Conspirator and The Last Station. The Last Station, by the way, is about Leo Tolstoy. James didn't play Tolstoy, he played Valentine. The producers figured that McAvoy was a chameleon, able to shift between English aristocrats and Russians with ease. The film scooped up plenty of award nominations. For everyone except James. Critics agreed his Valentine was understated. In 2011, McAvoy finally found his big tentpole franchise replacement for Wanted. He snuck into the X-Men universe. Being a fan of the old movies with Patrick Stewart, James secretly shaved his head, assuming he'd need to rock the Professor X bald look eventually, and figured he'd learn to wear bald caps like a pro during pre-production. When he showed up, director Matthew Vaughn just about blew a gasket. This Professor X was supposed to be 30 and definitely not bald. Since James couldn't regrow his hair overnight, he spent most of the film in a special wig, enduring Vaughn's curses about how, in a wig, McAvoy looked more like a dork than a distinguished professor. McAvoy also took it upon himself to copy Patrick Stewart's accent, convinced it would be the right touch. Vaughn made it very clear that it was exactly the wrong touch and banned James from doing it. Later, McAvoy would joke bitterly that all his brilliant prep was thrown out the window, so he just sort of showed up and wandered around the set. Still, Vaughn said James was always his first choice for Xavier, and since McAvoy said yes right away, he never considered anyone else, and he didn't regret it on set. At the box office, X-Men First Class fell a little short of expectations. $353 million on a $140 million budget. As a result, plans for the franchise were shaken up, and the sequel ended up as a crossover with the old X-Men cast thrown in for good measure. With the X-Men brand getting wobbly, McAvoy found other flops to star in. Between 2011 and 2014, 3 of his movies stumbled: Welcome to the Punch, The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, and Trance. Only Trance actually bombed hard. It cost $20 million and made $24 million. People had high hopes, but it didn't even break even into the US top 10 on opening week, and quickly fizzled out. Then there's Filth, which had a similar but even worse fate than Inside I'm Dancing. Only 100,000 IMDb ratings. For IMDb, 100,000 is a lot, but the context is that bigger hits get hundreds of thousands more. So Filth never went truly mainstream. It didn't bomb per se. A $5 million budget versus $10 million returned, but let's be honest, that's pocket change. There were hopes the film would get critical recognition, maybe even become a cult classic, but critics didn't bite, and it was snubbed by awards completely. Any of this could have sunk James's career, but he caught the lifeline every actor dreams of. In 2014, X-Men Days of Future Past stormed into theaters. It became the highest-grossing X-Men film ever, hauling in $746 million on a $200 million budget. But weirdly, this blockbuster didn't boost McAvoy's career. He seemed to be doing everything not to capitalize on it. No sooner had X-Men exploded at the box office than he stumbled with Victor Frankenstein, a $40 million film that managed to pull in only $34 million. Even the critics recoiled in horror. For audiences, the reaction was maybe a hair better, but that's saying very little. It's the kind of film you put on just to have something in the background. Audio optional. Watch at your own risk. Things got worse in 2016 for X-Men as a brand. Apocalypse hit theaters, but the crowd response and ratings tanked compared to Days of Future Past. It grossed $543 million on a $178 million budget. Underwhelming. McAvoy's downward slide continued with Submergence, where he did a dramatic dive after Alicia Vikander. And, well, they made a grand total of $1 million on a $15 million budget. Even with that, no one managed to hit rock bottom quite so literally. What happened next was peak accidental career move. In 2017, M. Night Shyamalan's Split hit cinemas. Originally, Joaquin Phoenix was set to star, but he wanted total creative control over his character, and, unsurprisingly, a bigger paycheck. Rumor was he wanted $3 to $4 million of the $9 million budget, which was probably fair considering his going rate. After months of back and forth, Phoenix, who was on good terms with Shyamalan and even pitching character ideas, suddenly ghosted the production. Classic Phoenix move. Sometimes he quits a project because he woke up on the wrong side of bed. Or maybe he spotted a whale shark while vacationing in the Maldives and had to check it out. So they started hunting for a new lead. Shyamalan happened to stumble into a rowdy crowd at Comic-Con, finding, lying right in the middle, James McAvoy. McAvoy was nearly bald at the time from shooting X-Men, even though the Split villain wasn't meant to be bald. Shyamalan loved that look so much he decided the main character just had to be bald. He pounced on James with rapid-fire questions. James barely knew what was happening, and by the next day he'd found out he'd agreed to do Split. He later joked he was just glad it turned out to be a not-at-all traumatizing film. Contracts came later, but James says he's a man of his word. Filming Split caused headaches for the team making Atomic Blonde. In one Shyamalan scene, James had to punch a door. The part of the door he was meant to hit was padded with fabric, and during rehearsals, he always hit his mark. But when the cameras rolled, he missed and broke his hand. Fortunately, these were some of the last Split scenes, so he only shot a few takes with the broken hand, but then went straight to the Atomic Blonde set in a cast for several weeks. Split turned out to be one of 2017's biggest hits, $278 million from just a $9 million budget. As for his paycheck, James basically worked for peanuts. The numbers were never released, but he said he cleaned up thanks to bonuses, letting him upgrade his car collection and his place. The fight scenes in Atomic Blonde had to be quietly trimmed, because with a busted hand, McAvoy wasn't exactly Bruce Lee. His kung fu was dialed down to minimum viable. Still, Atomic Blonde did pretty well, $101 million on a $30 million budget. It looked like his luck was finally turning. But for McAvoy, there was always some cosmic banana peel to slip on. The sequel to Split, which ended up being called Glass, was one of the most anticipated movies of 2019. And at the box office, it did well. With a $20 million budget, it pulled in $247 million. The actors also walked away with a nice payday this time, since everyone had solid percentage deals. But with critics and audiences crashing the ratings, you couldn't really call it a straight-up success. Bruce even won a Razzie for his performance. To be fair, looking back now, you could already see in this film that things weren't quite right with him. And that was 2019. He didn't officially leave acting until 2022. A similar story played out with the sequel to It. Expectations were sky high after all. The first film was a monster hit, raking in $702 million worldwide. The sequel didn't flop per se. It brought in $473 million on a $79 million budget. But let's be honest, that is a massive drop at the box office, even more dramatic than what Glass experienced. And if you thought Glass took a beating from audiences, It Chapter 2 got it even worse in the ratings department. So, on paper, James had back-to-back hits, but each one came with a giant asterisk that kept him from true blockbuster superstardom. Things got truly messy with Dark Phoenix. After the crash and burn box office of Apocalypse, the studio decided to do some damage control and put Simon Kinberg in the director's chair. The same Simon Kinberg who had already fixed the disastrous Fantastic Four back in 2015. You see where this is going, right? The flop of Fantastic Four was so loud, you'd think the studio would learn. But nope, they decided to double down. So Simon shot his Dark Phoenix in 2017. The film was supposed to come out in 2018, but after disastrous test screenings, where audiences basically agreed they got Fantastic Four 2.0, the studio panicked and started reshoots. The release date got punted to 2019, and during this whole process, James kept getting yanked off other sets for endless rewrites and reshoots. Unsurprisingly, he avoids talking about Dark Phoenix. Not because of NDAs, but because under contract, he was forbidden from trash-talking it for a few years. Maybe he'll cut loose soon. They spent between $200 and $240 million making Dark Phoenix, and only made $252 million worldwide. That was the end of the X-Men as we knew them. These days, Marvel leans hard into fan service, so James could theoretically come back. Though, let's be honest, they mostly use Patrick Stewart. All of this turbulence didn't do wonders for McAvoy's career. And then, pandemic. Everyone and their neighbor was stuck at home, and James wound up doing TV projects and movies shot for, well, bagels. You could spot him in series like The Sandman and His Dark Materials. His movies, like Together and The Book of Clarence, basically went straight to nowhere. He also dabbled in a couple of streaming oddities like Bubble. Did anyone talk about them as breakout successes? No, not really. But then in 2024, James finally landed a genuine box office hit. Speak No Evil crushed it, raking in $78 million on a $15 million budget. Another horror film. Seems like if you want to scare audiences, James is your man. Viewers almost always dig him in these roles. So, where does that leave McAvoy nowadays? Well, his career isn't exactly A-list, but it's certainly not bad. Most of his salary figures remain a mystery, except for a couple of stories he shared. Early in his career, he was offered £40,000 to play Tom Riddle in Harry Potter. The catch? He would have had to sign up for several films at once, and James wasn't into being tied down, so he declined. Fast forward, and he reportedly got $2 million for Speak No Evil. As for his other movies, he obviously got paid, though rumors say many of those gigs were less than $1 million. Smaller budgets? smaller paychecks. As we've seen, McAvoy's career may not be shining from the Hollywood mountaintop, but he's not scrubbing floors in the basement either. In some ways, things are actually going pretty well. He's got several projects lined up of various and sometimes suspicious quality. So James isn't disappearing anytime soon. He's not even 50 yet, so there's plenty of time for him to surprise us all.